Uh,
Rhodes,
Minnesota.
Rhodes, Rhodes and Guggenheim, 24.
There we go. Minnesota at Rutgers. Minnesota is favored by 6 in this one. Rutgers is coming off a bye, so there is the possibility of, some extra prep time for Greg Schiano, who was tight-lipped about injuries in his press conference, so he was not talking about that
Yeah.
very much. There are some interesting storylines in this one, Zach. I think most people are writing this game off as not really much to think about, but you think about Kurt Soraka coming over from
Mhm.
Minnesota, Corey Heatherman coming over from Rutgers. I mean, there's some neat storylines in this game of different players. Athan Kaliak-Manis, his old team, playing against them. I think there's some really neat storylines in this one. Obviously, we're going to give more analysis than storylines here, but I mean, what's your thoughts overall on the game? Maybe mention some of those storylines and then get into some of your analysis of what you think will go on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting because, like, on one hand, I don't think there's any like ill will from Kaliak-Manis, and certainly not ill will from Kurt Soraka. I think obviously Kaliak-Manis, he knew he had to move on from Minnesota, but it allowed him to reunite with his old offensive coordinator, and I think Kaliak-Manis is I think who we thought he was. I think there have been times he's been maybe a little better, but overall, I think we've said this multiple times. His goal was never to be a life-changing quarterback for Rutgers. His role was to be game manager, be able to be smart with the football. And if you saw Gavin Wims at Kentucky this past Saturday, you know what happened. He kind of threw the game away, literally. So Athan Kaliak-Manis is kind of the game manager who can throw a few nice passes. He's in a better system for him, back with his old offensive coordinator. And I think because of that, Minnesota got the guy that they really wanted, which was Max Brosmer. And so I think it is very interesting because on one hand, I think Brosmer is one of the most underrated guys in the Big Ten, if not the country, at quarterback. But I think Rutgers has the guy that they really believe in, at least to help carry their team. But it hasn't worked out super well. A lot of that I don't think is Kaliak-Manis's fault. I think it's injuries to the offensive line, injuries to the defense. Like, this is supposed to be a defensive laden team, and they've just been starting with Teray. Like, even though that was preseason, that injury I think set the tone for kind of the descent that Rutgers has had, and so I think that has really colored it. It's this game in terms of projecting it. I think is hard because I think the question in my mind is what Rutgers team do we get after the bye? Like, does Schiano have a way to rally the troops to get them to chop once more? It's at home, and while I really believe in Minnesota, Minnesota's not that much greater that they are immune from an upset. And as much as I think PJ Fleck can have his moments, he's stubbed his toe a few times. And so I think those are a couple questions for me on both sides. Like, what's the health of Rutgers and do they believe again? Because I think that's a big part of this is do they have confidence and are they getting healthy? On the other side, Minnesota has looked really good over the past few weeks, but PJ Fleck has been prone to stub his toe. And so is this one of those games where maybe they're like, "Oh yeah, like they're feeling themselves a little bit, especially after a big win, first win over Brett Bielema. Are they feeling themselves a little bit and does that really hurt them going into this game?"
Yeah, I think that PJ Fleck is going to keep these guys focused. This seems like a Minnesota team that's very on track with trying to right the wrongs from earlier they had in the year, North Carolina, Michigan, and the likes like that. My biggest concern with Minnesota in this game is actually the tackling, because you look at
Mhm.
what Minnesota has done against the best running backs they've had on their schedule, which, Zach, tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe the best running backs they had on their schedule were Amari Hampton, Caleb Johnson, and Khalil Mullins.
Yep.
They had in those games 20 missed tackles against North Carolina, 13 missed tackles against Iowa, and 14 missed tackles against Michigan. They
Yep.
they lost all three of those games. Those are all three of their losses, and those are all against very good running backs. Now, I think all of those offensive lines were set up better than Rutgers is right now.
Mhm.
So, and we don't really know because Greg Schiano was being tight-lipped about the injury report. We didn't get an injury report last year, so we'll see what this offensive line for Rutgers looks like. But at the end of the day, this to me is the game Illinois was to a certain extent. Illinois was definitely a big statement game, a ranked win. But this
Mhm.
to me is the game where Minnesota truly does right their wrongs that they had earlier on in the season. The missed tackles, being run all over by
Mhm.
Hampton, Khalil Mullins, Caleb Johnson, those kind of guys, and being able to
Yeah.
say, hey, Rutgers, you might have one of the best running backs in the nation in Kyle Menungai. He might run for 100 yards in this one and a touchdown or two, but he's not going to run all over us. We're not going to be missing tackles left and right. And we're going to make sure that we get him down to the ground and don't let him pick up easy first downs. If Minnesota
Yeah.
can do that, I believe they can. I think that this Minnesota team has gotten better. I believe they can. And I think that Rutgers does have the questions on the offensive line. But for me, that's going to be the main thing I'm looking at because it is a disadvantage that Minnesota has had earlier on in the year, and it's their opportunity to fix that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Menungai has been great, and I think he's still one of the best running backs in the conference. I think it really hurts that Sam Brown's hurt for the year because he could really give some relief, and Kyle Menungai, like, he needs help, and, like, the receivers, they've definitely improved in the receiver room, but like Ian Strong, Demir Miller, Christian Dremel, they're good complementary pieces, but none of them are going to be able to take the pressure off of Menungai. And I like having Brown, I think would have been helpful just as a guy who could be a change of pace back, give Menungai a breather. But I think the difference is like you look at Minnesota, they have a full complement of playmakers on both sides of the ball. And to me, that's the main difference in this is I'm like, who are Rutgers playmakers? Well, the only one we know that's healthy is Menungai. Like a lot of their other playmakers are hurt. Ja Joyner has been a stud. Justin Wally, Coy Parrish. I mean, that's just the defensive side of the ball. And then you talk about the offensive side of the ball. You've got Darius Taylor, you have Major, you have Daniel Jackson, and you have a playmaker in Max Brosmer. Like that's 7, 8 guys who you're like, those are high level players who can make plays, which is why I am concerned legitimately when Minnesota plays Penn State
Mm-hmm.
because Minnesota actually has guys on both sides of the ball that can wreck a game.
Right.
And Rutgers has one of those. Minnesota has 7 or 8.
Right.
And to me, that's the difference in this game for me. And so I like Minnesota. Um, I have them 24-13. I think it's lower scoring, but I think Minnesota gets it done in Piscataway.
Interesting. Yeah, I think this one will be a little bit higher scoring. I think that Max Brosmer is going to have a good game against this Rutgers secondary. I think Daniel Jackson could go over 100 yards receiving in this one, maybe a touchdown or two. But for me, the thing that is really going to solidify this one for Minnesota, I think they're going to get turnovers. They've been +9 in the turnover
Yeah.
margin the past 4 games. They've been on this winning streak. And so if they can keep that up, which, I mean, Athan Kaliak-Manis is not the most accurate quarterback in the world. So if you can get Justin Wally, Coy Parrish, these guys, I mean, Coy Parrish right now is leading the Big Ten in interceptions with 5. So if
Mhm.
these guys can get some interceptions and turn the ball over, maybe get some fumbles, maybe a strip sack on Kaliak-Manis or something like that, I think that's going to be huge for him. I do think that Kyle Menungai has a good day. I think that Minnesota continues with the missed tackles and stuff. Not to the level of what they had against North Carolina. I don't think they're going to have 20 missed tackles, but I could see them getting over 10 in this one. But the defense steps up when they need to, and like I said, they get a pick six or they get an interception or they get a strip sack that sets up the offense in a good position or something like that. And then you see Minnesota taking advantage of those opportunities. I'm going to say Minnesota in this one 31-21. Like I said, a little bit higher
Mm,
scoring, but I
yeah.
could see a good day from Menungai, 3 touchdowns, 2 or 3 touchdowns, 150 yards or something like that. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, the turnovers are just too much.
I'll just say, do you know how many times Minnesota has scored over 30 points this season?
It's twice, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
48 against Maryland and 48
48 against Rhode
against Rhode
Island, right?
Island. Yeah. So that's not to say I think what you said I think could happen. I'm just hesitant, especially on the road. But I think the way they would get there would be a defensive score. So I think
Yeah.
that's good on you.
Yeah. Or even if it's not a defensive score, I think some kind of turnover to put them in better field position to get
Yeah,
there.
that's good.
I really believe in this Minnesota offense. I think that they have a good O line. I don't know if it's an elite O line, but I think it's a good O line. I think
Mhm.
Darius Taylor is a very good running back. Max Brosmer is a good quarterback. He has good weapons. Daniel Jackson on the outside being the main one of those good weapons, and I think they have more firepower than Rutgers
Yeah.
has right
Oh
now on
yeah.
defense.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right. Let's get through a few comments. Sorry guys. I normally go through the comments before my prediction. Philip says, "Does Athan Kaliak-Manis want some antidote from Fleck?" I don't know. Would Fleck give him the antidote, or would he swap it for some kind of poison? The confidence poison or something.
He would give it to him after the game
Oh yeah.
for next week.
Who do they play next week?
Who does Rutgers play next week? They play Maryland. Yeah,
Yeah,
give
that's
him
not
some
going to impact.
antidote for give him some antidote so they can beat Mike Loxley.
Well, they play Illinois. Yeah,
Wait, they
say, hey,
play
save
Illinois.
this. Save this for when you play
Oh
Illinois
yeah, yeah,
after
yeah, yeah,
Maryland.
yeah. There you go. Yeah, half for Maryland. Actually,
Oh,
no, a third for Maryland and 2/3 for Illinois.
hey, my wife loves half and halves. A little
Nice.
bit of Arnold Palmer.
There you go. There you go.
Philip says B minus Minnesota game still gets them the win over Rutgers. Yeah, yeah. I don't think Minnesota needs to come out and play their best game. I think they
Yeah,
have enough firepower, and Rutgers unfortunately is just a little
yeah.
too banged up. Jeremy says I think Minnesota wants to win this one. Many guys on each staff came from the other team. I think both teams are going to want to win this one. Yeah, I think both teams are going to want to win it pretty bad, and I think when both of them want it pretty bad, I have to go with the team with more playmakers, and
Mhm.
that's Minnesota. It's not always been Minnesota in some of these games, but that's
Yeah.
Minnesota. I can't pronounce this name. He says, "Have you already done IU?" Nope, IU is last. We will save them for last today. They are the special game against Michigan. Jeremy also says Minnesota does struggle with run D. I'm confident Minnesota's ability to cover Rutgers wide receivers Kaliak-Manis isn't a difference maker. I did say that early on in the year that Minnesota struggled with run D, but part of it is also they just faced really good running backs. Like
Yeah.
it's the opposite of Washington, where Washington has just faced really bad quarterbacks,
Yeah.
so they look better. Not many teams in the country have faced as many good running backs as Minnesota has. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think
Um,
if I'm correct, I think Omarion Hampton is uh most people see him as a first round NFL draft pick.
yeah. He had a
Uh,
fantastic year last year. Was a little overshadowed by Ollie Gordon, but he had a fantastic year last year, and yeah, he's continuing to do so this year as well.
yeah. He's really
John
really
says
good.
28-10 Minnesota, so nearly 30, and then Jeremy says 21-10 Minnesota. Yep,
Mhm.
yep.